The sun hung mercilessly in the cloudless Montana sky as Harriet Aldridge stumbled along the dusty road, her once fine boots cracked and worn from weeks of travel. It was the summer of 1878, and the promise of a new life in the West had quickly turned to desperate survival. Her stomach twisted with hunger pangs so severe they felt like knives, her last meal nothing but a handful of berries she'd found 2 days prior. The sight of a sprawling ranch in the distance had given her hope. But now, as she approached a weathered barn, her vision began to blur. The world tilted sideways as her knees buckled beneath her, the rough wooden boards of the barn the last thing she felt before darkness claimed her. Zachary Prentice had been mending a saddle when he heard the thud outside. The tall, broad-shouldered cowboy set aside his tools and stepped out into the harsh sunlight, shielding his eyes with his hand. That's when he saw her, a young woman collapsed in a heap beside his barn, her dark hair fanned out around her pale face, a small carpet bag clutched in her limp fingers. He rushed to her side, kneeling in the dirt. Miss, can you hear me?" When she didn't respond, he carefully gathered her in his arms, surprised at how light she felt. Her cheeks were sunken, her wrists painfully thin. Hunger, he realized. She was starving. With a gentleness that belied his rough exterior, Zachary carried her into the ranch house, laying her on his own bed before hurrying to the kitchen. He stoked the fire in the cook stove, set water to boil, and cut thick slices of bread. He added beans to a pot along with the last of the bacon he'd saved from breakfast. The poor woman needed substance, and quickly. Harriet awoke to the smell of food cooking. For a moment she thought she was dreaming such scents had long since been relegated to memory. Her eyes fluttered open to find herself in an unfamiliar room, on a real bed with clean sheets. Panic seized her as she tried to remember how she'd gotten there. "Easy now," came a deep voice from the doorway. A tall man with sun-bronzed skin and kind eyes approached, carrying a tray of steaming food. "Found you passed out by my barn. Reckon you haven't eaten in quite some time." Harriet tried to speak, but her parched throat produced only a rasp. The man set the tray beside her and helped her sit up, propping pillows behind her back. "Eat first, talk later," he said, placing a spoon in her trembling hand. "You need your strength." Harriet wanted to maintain her dignity, to explain herself properly, but the aroma of the food broke her resolve. She ate slowly at first, then with increasing urgency, as her body reminded her just how desperate it was for nourishment. The cowboy watched her with a mixture of concern and approval. "Name's Zachary Prentice," he offered when she'd slowed her eating somewhat. "Most folks call me Zach. This is my ranch, the Triple P." She swallowed a mouthful of beans before responding. "Harriet Aldridge, I apologize for intruding on your property." "No apology needed, Miss Aldridge. Where are you headed?" "Silver Creek," she replied, naming a mining town about 30 miles north. "I have an aunt there. At least, I hope I still do." "It's been many years since we've corresponded." Zach nodded, his face betraying nothing of his thoughts. "That's a fair distance, especially on foot. What brings you out this way alone?" The question brought tears to her eyes, which she quickly blinked away. "It's a long story, Mr. Prentice." He gestured to her half-empty bowl. "Like I said, eat first, talk later. There's plenty of time for stories." True to his word, Zach asked no more questions as Harriet finished her meal. He brought her fresh water and even produced a small jar of peach preserves for her bread. By the time she had eaten her fill, the worst of the hunger had subsided, replaced by a bone-deep weariness. You need rest, he said, gathering the dishes. Sleep now. We can figure things out tomorrow. Harriet wanted to protest, to insist she couldn't impose further, but exhaustion won out. As her eyes drifted closed, she heard him moving quietly around the room and felt safer than she had in months. When Harriet awoke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the window. For a moment, disoriented, she thought perhaps she'd dreamed the kind cowboy. But the softness of the bed beneath her and the lingering taste of food told her otherwise. She sat up slowly, noticing clean clothes folded at the foot of the bed, a simple cotton dress that would be far too large for her, but cleaner than her travel-worn attire. After changing, she followed the smell of coffee through the modest but tidy ranch house. She found Zachary at a wooden table, reading a months-old newspaper. He looked up when she entered, a smile warming his features. "Good morning. How are you feeling?" "Much better. Thank you," Harriet replied, smoothing down the oversized dress. "I cannot express my gratitude enough, Mr. Prentice." "Zach," he corrected, standing to pull out a chair for her. "And you're welcome." He poured her coffee from the pot on the stove and set a plate of eggs and bacon before her. "Figured you could use another good meal before heading out." His words brought reality crashing back. She still had to reach Silver Creek, still had to face an uncertain future. "If you're ready to talk about it," Zach said, retaking his seat, "I'd like to hear what brought you to my doorstep half-starved." Harriet stared into her coffee cup, gathering her courage. "I came west from Boston after my father died 3 months ago. He was a banker, respected in our community." She took a steadying breath. "Or so I thought. After his death, it came to light that he had been embezzling funds. Everything was seized, our home, our possessions, even my mother's jewelry that I'd inherited." Zach's face darkened with sympathy. "I'm sorry. I had nowhere to go. My mother passed years ago, and my father's disgrace meant former friends wanted nothing to do with me." She took a sip of coffee. "I remembered my aunt in Silver Creek, my mother's sister. We exchanged letters occasionally when I was younger. She's the only family I have left." "So you came west with what little you had," Zach finished for her. Harriet nodded. "I had enough money for the train to Cheyenne. From there, I've been traveling by whatever means available, wagon trains, the occasional stagecoach when I could afford it. But the money ran out 2 weeks ago." Her voice grew quieter. "I've been walking since then, doing odd jobs when I could find them for food." Zach was silent for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to a drawer, and returned with a map which he spread on the table. "Silver Creek is here," he said, pointing to a spot north of their location. "About 3 days' ride. But the terrain isn't easy, especially for someone traveling alone." "I have no choice," Harriet said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "Actually," Zach said, meeting her eyes, "you do. I'm heading to Cedar Junction tomorrow to deliver some horses. It's about halfway to Silver Creek. I could take you that far, at least." Relief flooded through Harriet, quickly followed by suspicion born of hard experience. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." A faint smile touched Zach's lips. "Out here, we look after folks in need. It's how we survive. Besides," he added, his expression turning serious, "a woman traveling alone is an easy target for those with ill intentions." Harriet couldn't argue with his logic. The journey so far had taught her just how vulnerable she was. "I would be very grateful for the escort, Mr. Prentice Zach," she corrected herself, "but I have nothing to offer in return." "Wasn't asking for payment," he replied simply, but if you're determined to contribute, I could use help getting ready for the trip. Got supplies to gather, food to prepare." "Of course," Harriet said quickly. "I'm a capable cook when provided with ingredients, and I learn quickly." Something in Zach's eyes softened as he looked at her. "I don't doubt it. Finish your breakfast, and we'll get started." The day passed in a flurry of activity. Despite her recent ordeal, Harriet threw herself into the work, eager to prove her usefulness. She helped pack provisions, mended a tear in one of the bedrolls, and prepared a hearty stew for their evening meal. Zach worked alongside her, patient with her questions about ranch life, respectful of her capabilities. As they ate dinner on the porch, watching the sunset over the mountains, Harriet found herself studying her host. Zachary Prentice was nothing like the men she'd known in Boston. There was a straightforwardness to him, an absence of pretense that she found refreshing. His hands were rough from work, his face weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes held a kindness that had become rare in her experience. "How long have you had the Triple P?" she asked, breaking a comfortable silence. "Going on 8 years now," Zach replied. "Started with just 50 acres and a dozen cattle. Built it up slow and steady." "Alone?" The question slipped out before she could consider its propriety. If Zach took offense, he didn't show it. "Mostly. Hire hands during busy seasons. Had a partner once, but he moved on to California during the gold rush. Never did hear if he struck it rich." He glanced at her. "What about you? Besides a disgraced banker for a father, what's your story?" The blunt question startled a laugh from her. "There's not much to tell. A typical Boston upbringing for a girl of some means, lessons in music and French, charitable committees, social gatherings. I was engaged once, briefly." "What happened?" Harriet shrugged. "He found someone with a larger dowry. It was for the best, really. I didn't love him." Zach nodded, as if this confirmed something for him. "And now you're heading to Silver Creek to find your aunt. What then?" "I haven't planned that far ahead," she admitted. "Find work, I suppose. I'm educated enough to teach if the town needs a schoolmistress." "Most do," Zach said, "though the pay isn't much." At this point, Mr. Prentice, any pay would be welcome. They fell silent again, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Despite the uncertainty of her future, Harriet felt a peace she hadn't experienced in months. Perhaps it was simply having a full stomach and the promise of safe travel ahead, but she suspected it had more to do with the quiet cowboy beside her. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Harriet, wearing clothes borrowed from a trunk Zach explained had belonged to his late mother, helped load their supplies onto 2 sturdy horses. "Ever ridden before?" Zach asked as he adjusted a saddle. "A little," Harriet replied, "though it's been some time." Zach led out a gentle-looking mare with a white star on her forehead. "This is Daisy. She's steady as they come. We'll take it slow until you get your seat back." Harriet approached the horse cautiously, allowing Daisy to sniff her hand before stroking her neck. The mare nudged her affectionately, and Harriet felt a smile spread across her face. "She likes you," Zach observed. "That's a good sign." With his help, Harriet mounted the horse, arranging her borrowed skirts as modestly as possible. It felt strange to be astride again after so long, but her body remembered the posture. They set off just as the sun cleared the eastern hills, leading 2 additional horses that Zach was delivering to a buyer in Cedar Junction. The day was perfect for traveling warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers. As they rode, Zach pointed out landmarks and shared stories of the area, including a particularly harrowing tale of a winter blizzard that had nearly claimed his life during his first year at the ranch. "How did you survive?" Harriet asked, captivated. "Luck, mostly," he replied, "and a very determined horse who found his way back to the barn when I could barely see my hand in front of my face." By midday, they stopped beside a small creek to rest the horses and eat. Harriet's muscles were beginning to protest the unaccustomed activity, but she refused to complain. The beauty of the landscape, rolling grasslands giving way to distant mountains, made the discomfort worthwhile. "You're holding up well," Zach commented as he handed her a canteen. "Most city folks would be begging to stop by now." "I'm motivated," Harriet replied with a small smile, "and too proud to admit weakness." This drew a laugh from Zach, a rich sound that Harriet found herself wanting to hear again. Honesty and pride, good combination. As they continued their journey through the afternoon, Harriet found herself opening up further about her life in Boston, the dreams she'd had before her father's disgrace, the adjustment to her newly diminished circumstances. In turn, Zach shared more about establishing his ranch, the challenges of surviving in a land as beautiful as it was unforgiving. "It's not an easy life," he admitted, "but it's a good one. There's a freedom out here you won't find in cities." Harriet could see the truth of his words in the vastness around them. "It's magnificent," she said softly. "Terrifying in its immensity, but magnificent nonetheless." "That it is," Zach agreed, his eyes not on the landscape but on her face. They made camp as the sun began its descent, finding shelter in a stand of cottonwoods near another stream. Zach efficiently built a fire while Harriet prepared a simple meal from their provisions. They ate in companionable silence, tired from the day's travel but content. As darkness fell and the stars emerged in breathtaking profusion overhead, Harriet found herself reluctant for the day to end. She wasn't ready to acknowledge that each mile brought them closer to parting ways. "Have you always been alone?" she asked suddenly, then rushed to clarify. "I mean, you mentioned hiring hands, but it seems like a solitary existence." Zach poked at the fire with a stick before answering. "Not always by choice. The right person hasn't come along. Or if they did, the timing wasn't right." He looked up at her. "What about you? You mentioned a broken engagement, but no one since." "No," Harriet said. "Between my father's expectations and the social obligations of Boston society, there wasn't much opportunity for genuine connection. And now," she gestured vaguely at herself, "who would want the penniless daughter of a criminal?" "Someone who sees your worth beyond your father's mistakes," Zach said quietly. "Someone who recognizes strength when they see it." Their eyes met across the fire, and something shifted between them, a recognition, perhaps, of possibilities neither had previously considered. The moment stretched, fragile and charged, until Zach cleared his throat. "We should get some rest. Another full day of riding tomorrow." Harriet nodded, both relieved and disappointed by the retreat to practicality. As she settled into her bedroll, listening to the night sounds of the prairie and Zach's steady breathing from the other side of the now dimming fire, she wondered what might have happened if one of them had been brave enough to bridge the gap that moment had created. Morning came with a light mist that burned off quickly as the sun rose. They broke camp efficiently, both careful to maintain a polite distance that hadn't existed the day before. The journey resumed in silence, though not an uncomfortable one. By mid-morning, They encountered the first sign of other travelers, a small family in a wagon heading west. Zach exchanged news with the father, while Harriet spoke with the mother, a tired-looking woman with 3 young children clinging to her skirts. "You're fortunate to have such a protective husband," the woman commented as they prepared to part ways. "Oh, he's not," Harriet began, then stopped at the knowing look in the other woman's eyes. "We're just traveling together to Cedar Junction." "If you say so," the woman replied with a small smile. "Safe journey to you both." As they rode away, Harriet found herself blushing at the assumption. Zach, noticing her discomfort, raised an eyebrow in question. "She thought we were married," Harriet explained, embarrassed. To her surprise, Zach didn't seem troubled by the misunderstanding. "Simpler that way sometimes," he said. "People out here make assumptions. Married woman traveling with her husband raises fewer eyebrows than other arrangements." "I suppose that's true," Harriet agreed, though she couldn't help wondering if there might be other reasons the idea didn't disturb him. The day grew warmer as they continued north. Around noon, they crested a hill to find a small herd of antelope grazing in the distance. They paused to watch the graceful animals, Harriet entranced by the sight. "They're beautiful," she whispered, afraid of startling them. "They are," Zach agreed. "First time I saw them, I could hardly believe something so delicate could survive out here. But they're tougher than they look." "Like many things in this country, I imagine," Harriet said. Zach looked at her with a new respect. "Exactly like that." They continued on, the conversation flowing more easily again as the tension of the morning faded. By late afternoon, they could see smoke from chimneys in the distant Cedar Junction coming into view. Something like disappointment settled in Harriet's chest. Tomorrow they would part ways, she to continue to Silver Creek, he to return to his ranch after concluding his business. The thought left her feeling hollow in a way that surprised her. In just 2 days, Zachary Prentice had become important to her in a way she hadn't anticipated. Cedar Junction proved to be a busy frontier town, not large, but significant enough to have a hotel, a general store, and several saloons along its dusty main street. Zach led them to a modestly sized livery stable where a balding man greeted him warmly. "Prentice, right on time. As usual. These the horses you rode about?" "Sure are, Bill," Zach replied, dismounting and helping Harriet down from her own horse. "This is Miss Aldridge," he added. "She's traveling to Silver Creek." Bill tipped his hat to Harriet. "Madam, not many ladies make that journey alone." "I'm fortunate Mr. Prentice offered to escort me this far," Harriet said. After settling the horses, Zach suggested they find accommodation for the night. The town's only hotel was a 2-story building that had seen better days, but it was clean enough. Zach secured 2 rooms, paying for both, despite Harriet's protests. "I insist on repaying you when I'm able," she said firmly as they climbed the stairs. "If it makes you feel better," he conceded, though his tone suggested he had no intention of collecting the debt. They agreed to meet for dinner after refreshing themselves. Alone in her small room, Harriet took stock of her appearance in a spotted mirror. The borrowed clothes hung on her frame, her face still showed the effects of her ordeal, and her hair was a tangled mess from 2 days of riding. She did what she could with the basin of water provided, washing her face and hands and attempting to bring order to her dark hair. When she met Zach downstairs, he had similarly tidied himself, changing into a clean shirt, though his trail dust still clung to his trousers. Something in his expression when he saw her made her self-conscious. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "Not at all," he replied quickly. You look nice." The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. "Thank you. Shall we eat?" "I find I'm quite hungry after the day's journey." The hotel dining room was simple but adequate, serving hearty frontier fare. Over plates of roast beef and potatoes, they discussed the next leg of Harriet's journey. "The stage to Silver Creek leaves tomorrow afternoon," Zach informed her. "I've secured you a seat." Harriet stared at him in surprise. "You didn't need to do that." "I wanted to make sure you'd get there safely," he said. "It's only another day's travel from here." "And you?" she asked. "Will you head back to your ranch tomorrow?" Zach nodded. "After I conclude my business with Bill and pick up some supplies, should be back home by day after tomorrow." An awkward silence fell between them, heavy with unspoken thoughts and feelings neither was ready to articulate. Finally, Harriet broke it. "I want to thank you properly, Zachary, not just for the passage on the stagecoach, but for everything. You quite literally saved my life when you found me by your barn." "Anyone would have done the same," he demurred. "No," Harriet said firmly, "not anyone. What you did, the kindness you've shown, it's not something I'll soon forget." Zach looked uncomfortable with her praise. "You needed help. I was there. Simple as that." But they both knew it wasn't that simple. Something had grown between them in their short time together, a connection neither had anticipated. After dinner, they walked briefly through the town, the evening air cool after the day's heat. The streets were busy with cowboys, miners, and the occasional respectable townsfolk going about their business. Harriet was acutely aware of Zach's protective presence beside her, the way other men gave them a wide berth because of it. At the hotel entrance they paused, reluctant to end the evening. "I should probably turn in," Harriet said finally. "It's been a long day." "Of course," Zach agreed. "I'll see you at breakfast." But neither moved. In the light spilling from the hotel windows, Harriet studied his face, the strong jawline softened by kind eyes, the weathered skin that spoke of years under the western sun. She memorized it, knowing that after tomorrow she might never see him again. "Good night, Zachary," she said softly, finally turning toward the door. "Harriet," he called, stopping her. When she looked back, his expression was troubled. He shook his head, whatever he meant to say, abandoned. "Sleep well." Alone in her room, Harriet sat on the edge of the narrow bed, her emotions in turmoil. In Boston, she had learned to guard her heart, to view potential suitors with practical consideration for what they could provide. But Zachary Prentice had slipped past those defenses without even trying, simply by being himself honest, kind, and unfailingly respectful. And tomorrow she would leave him behind. The thought brought unexpected tears to her eyes. It was foolish, she knew, to feel so strongly after such a brief acquaintance. Yet she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him, the sense that in another time, under different circumstances, they might have built something meaningful together. Harriet wiped her eyes, chiding herself for such fanciful thinking. She had an aunt to find, a new life to build. There is no place in those plans for a cowboy with a ranch 30 miles away, no matter how kind his eyes or gentle his hands. Morning came too quickly. Harriet dressed in the same borrowed clothes, packed her meager belongings, and went downstairs to find Zach already waiting. They ate breakfast without much conversation, the impending farewell hanging between them. Afterward, Zach accompanied her to the general store, where he insisted on purchasing supplies for her journey, a new shawl, some food items, and a small knife for protection. Harriet's protests fell on deaf ears. "Consider it insurance," he said, so I can sleep at night knowing you're prepared." The hours passed too quickly. Before Harriet knew it, they were standing beside the stagecoach as passengers began to board. Her ticket was clutched tightly in her hand, her carpet bag at her feet. "This is where we part ways," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. Zach nodded, his expression unreadable. "You'll be fine," he assured her. "Silver Creek is growing. Your aunt will be glad to see you, I'm sure." "And if she's not there?" The fear that had been lurking since she'd left Boston surfaced at last. "Then you come back to Cedar Junction," Zach said firmly. "Send word to me. I'll come get you." The offer, so simply stated, nearly undid her composure. "I can't ask that of you." "You didn't ask, I offered." His eyes held hers. "I meant it, Harriet." The stagecoach driver called for final boarding. It was time. "Goodbye, Zachary," Harriet said, extending her hand formally. "I can never repay your kindness." Instead of shaking her hand, Zach took it gently between both of his. "Write to me," he said. "Let me know you arrived safely." "I will," she promised, and then it was time to board. With one last look at the cowboy who had saved her life, Harriet climbed into the stagecoach and took her seat beside an elderly woman and across from a salesman with a case of samples. As the coach lurched into motion, she looked out the window to see Zach still standing there, watching. He raised his hand in farewell, and she returned the gesture, her throat tight with unshed tears. The journey to Silver Creek passed in a blur. Harriet barely registered the passing landscape or the attempts at conversation from her fellow passengers. Her mind kept returning to the Triple P Ranch, to a quiet dinner on the porch, to the way Zach's eyes crinkled when he smiled. It was late afternoon when they arrived in Silver Creek. The town was larger than Cedar Junction, prosperous from the nearby mines that gave it its name. As Harriet stepped down from the coach, carpet bag in hand, she felt a momentary panic. Now what? She approached a woman sweeping the boardwalk in front of a millinery shop. "Excuse me, madam, I'm looking for Augusta Thornton. She would be my aunt." The woman's face registered surprise, then sympathy. "Oh, honey, Augusta passed on last winter. The influenza took her and a dozen others." The news hit Harriet like a physical blow. Her last hope gone. "I see," she managed. "Thank you for telling me." "You're her niece from back east?" Harriet nodded. "Harriet Aldridge. I didn't know she'd passed." The woman's expression softened. "I'm Martha Wilson. Augusta and I were friends. She mentioned you in her letters sometimes." She hesitated. "Have you just arrived? Do you have a place to stay?" "I just got off the stagecoach," Harriet admitted. "And no, I don't have arrangements yet." Martha nodded decisively. "Then you'll come with me. My husband and I have a spare room since our daughter married. We can sort things out from there." Too numb to argue, Harriet followed Martha to a modest house a few streets from the main thoroughfare. Martha's husband, a kind-faced man named Thomas, welcomed her without question, and soon Harriet found herself seated at their dinner table, explaining her circumstances. "So you came all this way only to find Augusta gone," Thomas said when she'd finished. "That's a hard blow." "I'm not sure what to do now," Harriet confessed. "I have no means, no connections." "What can you do?" Martha asked practically. "Any skills?" "I'm educated," Harriet replied. "I can read, write, do figures. I play piano, speak some French. Nothing particularly useful, I'm afraid." Martha and Thomas exchanged a look. "Actually," Martha said, "the town's been looking for a school teacher. The last one left to get married 3 months ago. The children have been running wild ever since." Hope flickered in Harriet's heart. A school teacher? I could do that. I'm on the town council, Thomas added. I could speak to the others tomorrow. It doesn't pay much, mind you, but it includes a small house behind the schoolhouse. You'd have a roof over your head, at least. For the first time since learning of her aunt's death, Harriet felt a sense of possibility. I would be very grateful for the opportunity, Mr. Wilson. Then it's settled, Martha declared. You'll stay with us until it's arranged. Now, you look exhausted, dear. Let me show you to the guest room. That night, lying in a strange bed in yet another unfamiliar place, Harriet thought of Zach. She'd promised to write, to let him know she'd arrived safely, but the news awaiting her had been anything but safe. Still, a promise was a promise. Tomorrow she would send a letter to the Triple P Ranch, informing Zachary Prentice of her changed circumstances. But what then? Would that be the end of their brief connection? The thought left an ache in her chest that no amount of reasonable thinking could dispel. The next day, Thomas was as good as his word. By mid-afternoon, Harriet had been introduced to the other council members and offered the position of schoolteacher for Silver Creek. The salary was indeed modest, but the little house behind the schoolhouse was clean and furnished with the basics. She could start immediately, they told her, as the children had been without proper instruction for too long already. After writing her letter to Zach and seeing it dispatched with the outgoing mail, Harriet threw herself into preparing for her new role. She examined the schoolhouse, reviewed the available books, and began planning lessons. The work was a welcome distraction from her grief over her aunt and her confused feelings about a certain cowboy. The children, 23 in all, ranging from 6 to 16, were initially wary of their new teacher, but quickly warmed to Harriet's gentle but firm approach. Days turned into weeks, and Harriet found herself settling into a routine. She ate Sunday dinners with the Wilsons, attended church services, and gradually became known to the townspeople as Miss Aldridge, the school teacher, rather than that poor woman who lost her aunt. But no matter how busy she kept herself, thoughts of Zach persisted. She had received a brief reply to her letter, an expression of sympathy for her aunt's passing, satisfaction that she'd found employment, and a reiteration that his offer of help stood should she need it. She'd responded with a description of her new life, and they had exchanged a few more letters in the weeks that followed, friendly but increasingly formal. It was now early October. The mountains surrounding Silver Creek were ablaze with autumn colors, and a crispness in the air hinted at the coming winter. Harriet had just dismissed her students for the day and was erasing the blackboard when she heard the schoolhouse door open. "You forgot your lunch pail again, Jimmy Wilson," she said without turning. "One day your head will fall off, and you won't notice that either." "Not Jimmy," came a familiar deep voice, "though I did bring something." Harriet whirled around, the eraser falling from her suddenly nerveless fingers. Zachary Prentice stood in her classroom, hat in hand, a slight smile on his face. He looked just as she remembered, perhaps a bit more tanned from the summer sun, his eyes still that same warm blue. "Zach," she breathed, "what are you doing here?" "Came to check on you," he said simply. "Your letters stopped coming. Got worried." Harriet's hand flew to her mouth. It had been nearly 3 weeks since she'd written. The start of the school year had consumed all her attention. "I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to cause you concern." He shrugged. "Gave me a reason to make the trip." He glanced around the classroom. "So this is where you've been shaping young minds." "Trying to," she said, still stunned by his appearance. "How long have you been in town?" Just arrived. Asked directions to the school from a woman at the general store. He took a step closer. You look well, Harriet. Teaching suits you. She was suddenly conscious of her practical, somewhat severe schoolmistress attire, her hair pinned up in a no-nonsense style. Thank you. I enjoy it more than I expected to. She hesitated. How long will you stay? Depends, he said, his eyes never leaving her face. On what? On whether there's reason to stay. The implication hung in the air between them. Harriet's heart began to race. I could show you around town, she offered. It's quite charming, really. Zach's smile deepened. I'd like that. But first? He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Brought you something. Curious, Harriet unwrapped the package to find a delicate silver brooch in the shape of a wildflower. It's beautiful, she whispered, touching it reverently. Reminded me of you, Zach said. Pretty but tough enough to survive in harsh conditions. Tears sprang to Harriet's eyes at the thoughtful comparison. I don't know what to say. Say you'll have dinner with me, he suggested. I hear the hotel serves a decent steak. I'd like that very much, Harriet replied, pinning the brooch to her collar with fingers that trembled slightly. Give me a moment to gather my things. As they walked through Silver Creek together, Harriet was acutely aware of the curious glances they received. A new schoolmistress was one thing. A new schoolmistress accompanied by a handsome stranger was quite another. There would be talk. Harriet found she didn't care. Over dinner, Zach explained that he'd left the ranch in the capable hands of his foreman for a few days while he made the journey to Silver Creek. Wanted to see for myself how you were faring, he said. And what do you think? Harriet asked. Am I faring well? Seems like it, Zach replied. You've made a place for yourself here. That takes courage. I had little choice, she reminded him, but yes, I've been fortunate. The Wilsons have been especially kind. Martha at the general store? She spoke highly of you. Said the whole town's taken with their new teacher. Harriet blushed at the praise. I'm just doing my job. They talked through dinner and beyond, catching up on the weeks they'd been apart. Zach told her about the summer's cattle drive, the new foal born to his favorite mare, the improvements he was making to the ranch house. Harriet shared stories of her students, the quirks of small-town life, her plans for the school's Christmas pageant. It wasn't until the restaurant had emptied of other diners that they realized how late it had grown. Zach insisted on walking Harriet to her small house, the night air cool enough now that she was grateful for the shawl he'd bought her in Cedar Junction. At her door, they paused, a now familiar hesitation between them. Thank you for dinner, Harriet said, and for coming all this way just to check on me. There's another reason I came, Zach admitted, his voice low. Been thinking about you, Harriet, a lot. Her breath caught. I've thought of you too. Have you now? His smile was gentle in the moonlight. And what have you been thinking? That I miss our conversations, she said honestly. That I wonder what might have happened if circumstances were different. What circumstances would those be? If I weren't 30 miles away, teaching school in Silver Creek, if you weren't running a ranch near Cedar Junction. She looked down. If we'd met in a more conventional way. Perhaps, Zach laughed softly. Don't think there's anything conventional about us, Harriet, but distance? He shrugged. That's just a matter of how far a man's willing to ride. Hope bloomed in Harriet's chest. What are you saying, Zachary? I'm saying I'd ride 30 miles every week to court you properly if you'd allow it, His eyes held hers, serious now. "I'm saying I haven't been able to get you out of my mind since I found you beside my barn. And I'm asking if you might consider giving me a chance to show you what could be between us." For a moment, Harriet couldn't speak, overcome by emotions she'd kept carefully contained for weeks. "I would like that," she finally managed, "very much." The smile that spread across Zach's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Then I'll be back next Saturday. And the Saturday after that. For as long as it takes." "For as long as what takes?" Harriet asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "For as long as it takes for you to realize that what we found is worth building a life around." Before she could respond, he leaned down and gently, almost reverently, pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was brief but full of promise, and when he pulled away, Harriet felt as though something essential had shifted within her, a piece falling into place that she hadn't known was missing. "Good night, Harriet Aldridge," Zach said softly. "I'll see you Saturday." As she watched him walk away, Harriet touched her fingers to her lips, still warm from his kiss. For the first time since leaving Boston, the future didn't seem uncertain or frightening. It seemed full of possibility. True to his word, Zach returned the following Saturday, and the one after that. Each visit strengthened the bond between them. They explored the countryside around Silver Creek, attended church services together, and shared meals with the Wilsons, who had appointed themselves Harriet's unofficial guardians. By the time the first snow fell in late November, there wasn't a person in Silver Creek who didn't recognize that their school teacher and the rancher from near Cedar Junction were courting. As Christmas approached, Harriet found herself busier than ever with school activities. Her students were preparing a pageant for the town, complete with recitations and carols. The night of the performance, she stood at the back of the crowded church, watching proudly as her charges performed for their families. She didn't notice Zach slip in beside her until he took her hand. "They're doing well," he whispered. "You've taught them good." "Thank you," she whispered back, squeezing his hand. "I didn't expect you until tomorrow." "Couldn't wait," he replied. "Besides, I wanted to see this pageant you've been writing about for weeks." After the performance, as parents collected their children and townspeople mingled over cups of hot cider, Zach drew Harriet outside into the quiet, star-filled night. "I have something to ask you," he said, suddenly serious. "Been planning it for a while, but seems like tonight's the right time." Harriet's heart began to race as Zach reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small box. He opened it to reveal a simple gold ring set with a single pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Been saving it for the right woman." He took a deep breath. "Harriet Aldridge, I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Harriet's eyes as joy washed through her. "Yes," she said without hesitation. "Yes, Zachary Prentice, I will marry you." His smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. "Been thinking about practical matters," he said as he drew her into his arms. "The ranch is doing well, but I know you love teaching. Cedar Junction needs a school teacher, too. If you wanted to continue." "I would like that," Harriet said, touched by his consideration. "Though I may need to take some time away when we start a family." The thought of their children, brought a new softness to Zach's expression. "I'd like that, too. Very much." They were married in Silver Creek's church on a bright January day, with Martha Wilson standing in for the mother of the bride and Thomas giving Harriet away. The entire town turned out for the celebration, along with several of Zach's ranch hands and neighbors from near Cedar Junction. As they exchanged vows, Harriet thought back to that desperate day when she'd collapsed beside a weathered barn, starving and alone. How could she have known then that in her darkest moment, she was actually finding her way to happiness? After a brief honeymoon in Denver, Harriet moved to the Triple P Ranch, which suddenly seemed less like a remote homestead and more like the center of her world. She took up teaching at Cedar Junction's small school 3 days a week, spending the other days learning the workings of the ranch and making the house truly their home. Spring came, bringing new calves to the herd and wildflowers to the grasslands. On a warm evening in May, Harriet and Zach sat on the porch where they'd shared their first meal together, watching the sunset paint the sky in spectacular hues. "Any regrets?" Zach asked, his arm around her shoulders. "About leaving Boston, ending up here?" Harriet considered the question, thinking of all she'd endured and all she'd gained. "Not one," she said honestly. "Even the hardest parts led me to you. How could I regret that?" Zach pressed a kiss to her temple. "Luckiest day of my life. Finding you by that barn." "Mine too," Harriet replied, leaning into his embrace, "though I could have done without the fainting part." His laugh rumbled against her side. "I don't know. You were mighty pretty, all helpless and unconscious like." She swatted his arm playfully. "Zachary Prentice, that's a terrible thing to say." "But true," he insisted, his expression growing more serious. "Though not as pretty as you are right now, with the sunset in your eyes and my ring on your finger." Harriet's heart swelled with love for this man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "I love you," she said simply. "And I love you," he replied, "always will." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Harriet thought about the unlikely journey that had brought her to this moment, from privileged Boston banker's daughter to destitute traveler to respected schoolteacher to rancher's wife. None of it had been part of her plan, yet somehow it had become exactly the life she was meant to live. With Zach's strong arm around her and the vast Montana sky above, Harriet knew that whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together. And that was all that mattered. 2 years later, on another spring evening, Harriet sat in the same rocking chair on the porch, cradling their infant daughter while Zach played with their 1-year-old son nearby. The ranch had prospered under their joint care, expanding to include more cattle and horses. Harriet still taught at the Cedar Junction school, now with her children accompanying her on the days she worked. "Did I ever tell you," Zach said as he scooped up their giggling son, "that my father used to say a man isn't truly wealthy until he has someone to share his fortune with?" "You didn't," Harriet replied, smiling at the sight of her husband with their child. "But it's a wise sentiment." Zach sat beside her, settling their son on his knee. "Looking at you three, I reckon I'm the richest man in Montana territory." Harriet leaned over to kiss him, their daughter nestled securely between them. "And I," she said softly, "am the most fortunate woman who ever fainted beside a barn." Their laughter mingled in the evening air, rising toward the endless sky, a perfect harmony in the heart of the Wild West.